Hello again. My name's David, and if you're joining me for the first time, I recommend that you view the first video in this series, which I'll link down below, that explains what this is all about. But the long and short of it is I'm going through Kierkegaard's works, and by no means an expert. I'm just a guy, and I'm just going through the works, pointing out things that are interesting, pointing out my thoughts about what's going on. And today we're starting with the concept of irony, which is an early work. Kierkegaard didn't even consider this part of his official authorship. It still predates what he considers kind of the start of his work. Yeah, in this book, I thought I'd show some appreciation to like the physical book matter. I went out of my way to get the hardcover because the soft covers of these tend to fall apart. I've had some where the covers peeled back and stuff like that. So I went out of my way to pay extra and got some hardcover. This one's a little beat up. You can see there's some moldy graying, whatever. It's perfectly functional though. The pages inside pretty clean, pretty nice. There's a little bit. It's always fun to look at some marks from the person before me. But there's some marks towards the end of the work. They had their own little notation. It looked like little T marks. Very interesting. Anyway, that's not the purpose of this video. But like also what I've been doing is like going through my grandma passed away a few years ago, but she left me a lot of her bookmarks. So this is one from a place in Northern California that I visited with her called Filoli Gardens. And it's a little 3D. Anyway, that's holding my place. So I have finished the first part of this book, which is called Part One: the View Made Possible. In a word, basically, this is basically what would be considered a master's thesis today. What Kierkegaard was studying at the time. I'm not sure what that was. Oh, my light just burned out. Okay, it scared me. What Kierkegaard was studying at the time would be considered for a master's degree today. And this was his thesis that he had submitted. And it's all about the concept, what is irony, and what does it mean, when we're talking about Socrates, we can see some irony. What does that mean when we talk about that? It's something that's hard to pin down, as it turns out. But this first part, I think, is not the point of that. This first part is kind of laying the groundwork. The concern of the first part is mostly to do with who is the historical Socrates. There's different accounts of who Socrates was. Most famous one is Plato. We see that in a lot of Plato's works in the dialogues. Socrates is a character in the dialogues, but it's kind of clear. Even then, it was kind of clear that like, okay, something is weird. Something is kind of changing as as you go from the early dialogues to the later dialogues. Socrates is kind of becoming like a system builder in the Republic, where he's building a perfect republic. Like that doesn't seem to be, it seems like Plato's just putting words into his mouth, and it's just a little sock puppet basically. So trying to suss out who is the historical Socrates through three accounts: Xenophon, Plato, and Aristophanes. And in each of these, they have their different perspective. In a word, Xenophon has kind of a bias, kind of a purpose to show that, hey, this is ridiculous. Like, Socrates was a great man, and it's a shame that he was put to death. So, like, in a way, kind of like glorifying Socrates too much, in a word. So, like, we're kind of getting a little distorted view. Plato, as I said before, like the general consensus at the time, and I think even now, is that the earlier works they're closer to Socrates himself. And then Plato kind of developed his own philosophy later. So in the later dialogues, is sort of like, just using Socrates as a character, but Plato building his systems. So early works versus later works. Even as far as Book 1 of the Republic, which is discussed in here, they're saying, Kierkegaard is saying that Book 1 ends with a negative conclusion, which is very ironic, very very much like Socrates, very much like what he would have done. So like even up until that point in the Republic, like that's kind of, we get a little bit of a like a little aftertaste almost of what Socrates was like. But after that, it kind of becomes Plato's own thing. But it's all about, what is irony? We're trying to pin this down. It becomes this thing that's hard to pin down, as it turns out. I've gone through my notes, I've written them down, and I've highlighted words that come up when irony is discussed. So it gives you, and it kind of puts you in a state of mind that might help a bit. Page 19, irony works in nothingness, in empty space. Page 26, there's irony in silence. Page 48, the ironist has to act at a distance. Page 60, page 82, there's quietude in nothingness. Page 111, there's sort of a correlation between negative conclusions, which I've mentioned already, and irony. In 128, there's this is my mistake. I'm just going to cross this out. Page 131, irony kind of continually cancels itself, almost like a paradox, almost like a comical thing. So it's a tricky thing to pin down. Yeah, and I like this analogy actually that I started with on page 19. And there's a picture that goes along with this, which I found thanks to the internet, which is amazing. So let me. I'll show what that picture looks like. I have it to the side here, as I'm reading this, so you get this in your mind. The more Socrates tunneled under existence, the more deeply and inevitably each single remark had to gravitate toward an ironic totality, a spiritual condition that was infinitely bottomless, invisible, and indivisible. Xenophon had no intimation whatever of this secret. Allow me to illustrate what I mean by a picture. There's a work that represents Napoleon's grave. Two tall trees shade the grave. There's nothing else to see in the work, and the unsophisticated observer sees nothing else. Between the two trees there is an empty space. As the eye follows the outline, suddenly Napoleon himself emerges from this nothing. And now it is impossible to have him disappear again. Once the eye has seen him, it goes on seeing him with an almost alarming necessity. So also with Socrates' rejoinders. One hears his words in the same way as one sees the trees. His words mean what they say, just as the trees are trees. There is not one single syllable that gives any hint of any other interpretation, just as there is not one single line that suggests Napoleon. And yet this empty space, this nothing, is what hides that which is most important. So there's an idea that like the what it's about is actually this like hidden nothingness type thing. And what I find interesting about this is this nothingness, this concept of nothingness, is such a predominant thing in Buddhism or Asian philosophy. And I'm not super sure if Kierkegaard got that, although there's parts of the book where he does mention, generally just in a blanket term, like Orientalism, referring to something else, I believe, but like didn't really make that connection. But I think it's an interesting thing. Again, I have this book that's Japanese philosophy and Kierkegaard that I think draws these connections better. But it's an interesting thing. And then so other than that, like it's kind of hard. Like most of the thrust of this part one, it's just laying the groundwork. It's just trying to detangle, find out who the real Socrates is. I already explained about Xenophon. Kind of tries to dignify him too much. That's his bias. Plato, early works may be closer to the truth of what Socrates actually was, the historical Socrates. Aristophanes, I haven't really mentioned, but Aristophanes wrote a play called The Clouds, which is kind of a parody of sophists. You can read about them, but Socrates sparred with the sophists. He had, but this play, I think, was kind of lumping them together in a way, kind of like how Socrates is misunderstood And in a way, that actually saying that like through comedy, there's a lot of truth that comes out. Like we actually see indirectly who the character of Socrates is through this play, like poking fun at him. And like I love, actually, I'm gonna jump ahead a little bit because I love page 129 how it's explained that actually Socrates himself attended this play, which is awesome because it's like a little historical tidbit, and he enjoyed it, I think, because like he was able to poke fun at himself. Obviously, like you get this impression like this guy is kind of a fun guy, but let me see something. The case attested by antiquity, which recounts that the performance of the clouds was honored in this respect by the presence of his severest critic, Socrates himself, who to the public's delight stood up during the performance so that the theater crowd could see for themselves the fitting likeness. He was famous for being, kind of ugly, giant nose. You can see some busts of him, but like, like he was, he kind of got a kick out of it. It sounds like, which is kind of funny. But like, there's an interesting idea on the same page 129, that there's a truth in this comedy. Other than that, I have highlighted some, I think, important things to draw out, which are also like, the pattern of the previous videos. I've been highlighting points that have been anticipating later works and themes that sort of jump off the page once you already are kind of familiar with those. So like the first one on page 29, there's a reference to an infinite leap, which is like, I put like an exclamation mark. That's very much Kierkegaard, but I believe it comes from another philosopher. Well, I'll have to look it up here. Let me put it in context here. But we must not disregard the fact that the analogy to this history's repeated attempt at this infinite leap also has its truth. What Plato saw in Socrates was such a personality, an immediate conveyor of the divine, such as this. That doesn't really give a good context, but you can see that reference to infinite leap. And I am going to look it up because I believe this comes from another philosopher here, or another work. So Kierkegaard was already thinking of this infinite leap language. Let's see. Yeah, the footnote actually is in the background, page 477. It says, on this important term and category in later writings and in the paper, see, for example, Fear and Trembling. It looks like there's just some references coming up later on, so we'll have to reference them when they get in context there. But see also Lessing's theological writings. So I think he set the precedent, and Kierkegaard, was reading Lessing, and I believe attended lectures. I'm not sure about that. Maybe I'm getting them mixed up. In any case, like a little preview of coming attractions. Another thing that I thought was interesting was on page 48. I think this gives a good context for what Kierkegaard is trying to do in his entire authorship, which again starts after this. But basically saying that the ironist has to work at a distance. This distancing from their works, this is a very Kierkegaardian thing, because all of these works in Kierkegaard's authorship, or what's called the first authorship, are all by pseudonyms. So Kierkegaard doesn't put his actual name on them. He distances himself from them, and he says like these are things that he's putting out into the world, and he's not attaching his name to it. So there's a distancing. And Kierkegaard is very much an ironist in that sense. Let me see if I read this. If I should read this, because I think that is really the what he's setting up for his whole authorship. Precisely because is the nature of irony never to unmask itself, and also because his protean change of mass just as essential. The infatuated youth must inevitably experience so much torment. But just as there is something deterring about irony, it likewise has something extraordinarily seductive and fascinating. Its masquerading and mysteriousness, the telegraphic communication it prompts because An ironist always has to be understood at a distance. The infinite sympathy it presupposes the fleeting but indescribable instant of understanding that is immediately suspended by the anxiety of misunderstanding. All this holds one prisoner in inextricable bonds. A lot of words to say, like, okay, yeah, this, this at a distance, and I like this. It's like telegraphic almost, which is an awesome, awesome language there. Um, Another thing there is anticipating later Kierkegaard works, is this usage of the term either or, which is, I believe, the next book after this and the official start of his authorship. But the first place he mentions it in all his writings is on page 81 here. If I'll just skip to it here, and it's just the term either or. In Danish, I guess it's aut, aut. Although I don't know why, because like maybe that's not Danish, because I think Danish is enten eller. But anyway, okay, just getting off a tangent there. But let me see if I can see it in context, and if we can get. He's talking about Socrates, of course. Like, no, as someone who takes delight in the alternation of light and shadow found in a syllogistic either or, when almost simultaneously manifests broad daylight and pitch darkness, manifests the infinitely real and infinitely nothing. That's very Kierkegaardian, like putting all these like contrasts against themselves. It's the either or. It's like this or this. Yeah, but I thought that's interesting. So those are really anticipation to future works. And I just want to wrap up here. So let me see if I've started a couple other things that I can just briefly call out. The Apology, yeah, on page 37, Kierkegaard is saying actually the Apology is a really good look at the ironic activity of Socrates, and the idea that like such ridiculous sentences. Well, Socrates was sentenced to death, in case you didn't know, and the reason was saying basically he was annoying the public. He was causing people to doubt their faith in the gods, which is kind of true. Like, that wasn't really Socrates' main mission. Like, Socrates' mission was really in a negative way to sort of dismantle all these systems. Like, he was causing people to doubt everything, not just their faith in the gods. So it was just one of his activity, but his general method was just tearing everything down. In some dialogues, I believe, like, people even like are reduced to crying. They're just reduced to tears because it's like, everything they thought they knew was just, like out the window. But yeah. So like, if you want to see Socrates and his ironic activity, look at the Apology. He says, in terms of Plato, I've already mentioned that, yeah, the ironist has to work at a distance. I love this on page 61. This is also very Kierkegaardian. It says, the sum of experience cannot be taught. The sum of experience, it makes you think of numbers, and it's like, yeah, Kierkegaard is very much against that kind of like a trivial pursuit, building up a knowledge base in your head. It's like, the experience, the thing of experience, something you can't explain, you can't pass on. I also love this, kind of hit hard, I think. Page 75, the idea that the fuller a person's life is, the less they pay attention to the infinite or like immortality. And that's the Christian idea that, after you die, like, that's what it's going to be about. It's like your eternal life. But in a sense, it's right, because it's like, if you have a pretty comfy, cushy life, like, you're not going to think about eternal life. Like, you have it pretty good. You have it pretty cushy. You're eating well. You're pretty rich. Like, you're pretty good not having eternal life and a nice paradise, because you're kind of already living in a paradise. So, so kind of your focus is on the here and now. But if you're a Christian, like, it shouldn't be, but if you have a full life, it's going to be hard not to focus on that that current experience, and what are you looking for in the afterlife? More of, or even more eating and lounging around, like what more do you want? So and it's sort of like yeah, it's what is it? It's an inverse relationship on page 76. It's the finite life versus the infinite life. Again, that those dichotomies are very Kierkegaardian. But as you die to one, the other grows. So you die to this life, and then your life, your eternal life, your focus is on that. But like if you die to that eternal life, your focus is more on the here and now, the current finite life. And I thought it's very true, and it makes a lot of sense. Yeah. So it kind of hits home. But yeah, again, yeah, like so irony, laying the groundwork for irony, and I believe the second part is gonna build up in a less negative way, but like if that's even possible. I mean, like this is ironically trying to, maybe it's ironically trying to explain irony, but I'm not sure. We'll see in part two. Um, yeah, we'll see. But next time we'll go through part two, and then actually part two is not the end of the book. There's after this some excerpts from notes that Kierkegaard took during Schelling's Berlin lectures. So like his only trip out of the country his whole life, he went attended these lectures at the University of Berlin, 1841 to 1842. And at the same time, he was starting to write his first book, his Either Or. But we'll see what notes he took on those lectures. And I think he was growing frustrated in some parts of this, if I remember right. But we'll see. Not sure how much I'll get out of that. But we'll get to it when we get to it. So, yeah, join me next time for part two of the concept of irony. Thank you. Bye.